To some people, the boundlessness of infinity is terrifying, but to some, it is peaceful and calm. When I was little, I had my first idea of infinity. I didn't understand that apple trees could die, and I thought, what would happen if I just kept picking apples? How many apples would I have? Is there a word for that? There was, and the word was infinity. The idea that something could keep going forever has always fascinated me, and it's one of my favorite things to think about. When it comes to infinity, there are many questions that come to mind, such as whether or not there is a tangible infinity, is the universe infinite or finite, what makes something truly infinite? There are so many paradoxes caused by infinity. One of these paradoxes occurs when you add 1 to infinity, and the result is, well, infinity. When you write down this problem and try to subtract infinity from both sides, you're left with 1 equals zeros, which you can probably tell is an issue. It gets worse when you replace the 1 in the original problem with another infinity, and you're left with infinity equals 0. We can never truly study the entirety of infinity, so these problems may never be solved. But many physicists and mathematicians have tried their very best. Infinity is one of the hardest concepts for people to grasp, but the parable of the infinite hotel may help. Let's say that there's a hotel with an infinite amount of rooms. This hotel is called the Aleph Null Hotel, and you work at the front desk. The article Beyond Infinity explains that Aleph Null is the set of all natural numbers, and the set is considered countably infinite, as we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. One day, a man comes to the Aleph Null Hotel and requests a room. No worries, you say to the man. You announce over the loudspeaker, everyone, pack up your stuff and move to the room that is 1 more than your room number. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2, the guest in room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. The man says thank you, and he goes into the now vacated room 1. The next day, a bus that contains an infinite amount of people shows up, and they all want rooms at the Aleph Null Hotel. You think for a while, and then announce over the loudspeaker, everyone, pack up your stuff and move to the room double your current room number. Room 1 goes to room 2, room 2 to room 4, room 3 to room 6, room 4 to room 8, and so on. Now, an infinite amount of odd-numbered rooms are open for the infinite number of people on the bus. Clearly, the Aleph Null Hotel can fit any countably infinite number of guests. But what happens when a larger set wants rooms at your hotel? You might be thinking, no, that's not possible. Infinity is the biggest number, and there is nothing bigger. You would be right, except for the fact that infinity comes in different sizes. I'll explain this by going back to work at the Aleph Null Hotel. A couple weeks later, a new bus that contains an infinite amount of people shows up, and you think, well, this is great, I already know what to do. You're getting ready to announce the move on the loudspeaker until the bus driver walks up to you. You now see that every person on the bus is wearing a name tag. Their names all consist of an infinite string of the letters A and B. If you were to write down all of their names, you would still be missing a name. This name can be found by taking the opposite of the first letter of the first name, the second letter of the second name, and the third letter of the third name, and so on. This will leave you with a name that's nowhere on the list, because at least one letter is different from every other name that you've written down. Is the Universe Infinite? An article by Ethan Seigel dives into the infinity of the universe and explains why thinking about the universe as either infinite or finite both lead to many impossible scenarios. Essentially, there are 2 options for the size of the universe. The first is that it is infinite. The second is that it isn't. You may be thinking, well, duh, but when you really think about it, both of those options are incredibly hard to wrap your brain around. Let's consider the first option, of the universe being infinite. If this was the case, you could go in one direction forever, never running into any sort of wall and coming across every possible combination of atoms multiple times each. That seems impossible. So let's just think about the second option, that the universe is finite. In this case, you could travel a very long distance, but eventually, you might believe that you would run into a wall. But if there was a wall, there would have to be something beyond it. Unless the wall is infinite, in which case our entire theory of a finite universe breaks down. But it is possible for the universe to be finite without any walls. For this to be the case, the universe would have to be shaped pretty similarly to a donut, or the inside of a sphere, or many other shapes. No matter what shape you choose, the universe would have to be entirely contained within it, meaning that once you have traveled far enough, you would come right back around to where you started, just like if you walked around the entire Earth. So, scientifically speaking, there are hundreds of thousands of ways for the universe to be finite, but only a few for it to be infinite. The entry about infinity in Britannica explains that there is a problem with infinitely small numbers, mathematically speaking, as there is no smallest number. This issue led to the invention of calculus in the 1600s. This is much different from a tangible smallest infinity, because when you really think about it, nothing in life can be infinitely small. Mathematically, if you had a line and cut it in half, then in half again, then in half again, and again, and again, and again forever, it would just keep getting smaller. It would be a half, and then a fourth, and then an eighth, and then a 16th. But in reality, if you had a piece of rope and cut it in half, and half, and half again and again, eventually you'd be left with only atoms, and you can't break down an atom. Speaking of atoms, there's a fascinating example of infinity and the universe that revolves around an apple, a box, and atoms. The Netflix documentary, A Trip to Infinity, gives this example. Let's imagine a box. Nothing can come in, nothing can go out. We put an apple in the box, close the box, come back in, 100 years, the apple is dust. The apple contains chemical energy, and that energy will eventually come out, and the apple inside the box will get to be thousands of degrees. The particles can start to nuclearly fuse together. This will take a really long time, but eventually it will happen. You'll end up with probably some iron nuclei and lots of photons. Billions and billions of years later, neutrons will decay into protons and other fundamental particles, and then it'll sit there for a very, very long time. If there were 10 to the 24 atoms in the apple, then there would be 10 to the 10 to the 24 combinations that the particles could be in within the box. While that may be a very large amount, it's not infinite. Eventually, it will run out of new combinations and we'll have to reuse the old ones. What does this mean, you may ask? Well, it means that eventually, after a long time, you could open the box back up and find the same apple you put back into it originally. Any single thing that could exist in the box will, has, and does exist in the box multiple times over. The same reasoning can be used to explain why parallel universes probably exist. After hearing all of these mind-melting facts about the infinite, you may be left with more or less questions than you started with, but hopefully you can now understand the beauty of infinity.